The road into Prosper Gulch ran out of asphalt and nerve at the same bend. The Sierra rose in heat-shimmered tiers, cedars black against sky, the bones of mine tailings bleached a color that wasn't quite gray and wasn't quite dead. Mara Hollis eased her car around the sinkhole and let the engine idle down to a hush. The town was ahead, a handful of fronts propped against wind and history, the biggest of them her inheritance. The sign above the saloon door still read Prospector's Mercy. Its gilt mostly gone, but the letters stubborn. Someone had shot out the O with a 22 a long time ago. The porch boards groaned like a warning when she stepped up. A jay on the hitching rail hopped twice, cocked its head, and flew. At the threshold, a small black bird lay on its side, stiff, beak crammed with a pebble the size of a thumbnail, as if it had tried to swallow a secret. She nudged it aside with the toe of her boot. "Hello?" she said, because habit made you polite to rooms older than your grandparents. Dust answered, the slow drift of it in the angled light. Bottles slept in the back bar mirror, their labels sloughed to blank. A saloon piano hugged the wall, its keys yellowed in a way that felt like teeth. The place smelled like old sugar, mouse droppings, and the afterscent of a match. On the bar waited a banker's envelope, county stamp across the flap. The deputy clerk in town, a woman, with sun tea skin and a nameplate that read Peggy B., had slid it across to her an hour earlier with both hands, and a not-quite sympathy. "You got yourself a place, Miss Hollis." Inside the envelope, the deed, 2 iron keys, and a single-page letter in her father's hand. The script had always been a little too neat, like he wrote for the eye of a future auditor. "Mara, the house won't stand quiet until you balance what I couldn't." Dad, she put the letter down and read the deed again with the historian's habit of looking for where the ordinary broke open. Midway, below the legal metes and bounds, a narrow codicil had been pasted and crooked, newer paper on older. Title conveyed upon reconciliation of accounts as documented in the saloon ledger. Failing reconciliation, title reverts to the Crane estate. "Cute," she murmured. A stunt from some crank county judge. Or from the Crane's old family name in the records she de-skimmed, trying to keep their fingers on a pie that had long since gone to mold. It was more theater than law, probably. She took the keys in, turning them in her palm. The first was for the front door. The second looked like it belonged to something that had once been trustworthy. Behind the bar, a row of glasses waited with their mouths tilted up. She wiped a rectangle clear on the mirrored back bar with her sleeve and watched herself come into focus. 34. Hair tied back badly road-tired the set to her mouth that said she'd kept lists, and the lists had kept her. A fine mist crept across the glass as if the room had exhaled. Letters traced themselves in it, blunt and slow, like a finger dragging through frost. Count her first impulse was the rational one. Cracked seal on the sash window. Pressure in a place like this, doing strange things to drafts. She lifted the sash. The word stayed. When she wiped it with her sleeve, the letters didn't smear. They vanished, and underneath, the faintest scores lay in the glass itself, as if someone had written the word days ago with something harder than a finger. "And you are very proud of your theme," she said to the room. Duly noted. She crossed to the piano. The bench held its own dust shadow. When she pressed a key softly, the note thunked dull. Not enough tension left in the string to sing. She kept the lid closed. The second key fit a drawer set, flush into the bar. It took a practiced jiggle to turn. Inside waited a thick ledger bound in cracked black calf, a brass shackle clasped across it with a keyhole smaller than the pad of her smallest finger. The cover had a blind-stamped border, the sort pressed by a platen and patience. Across its bottom edge, the pages had been cut with some care, and later, much later, torn with none. A section near the center looked ragged, as if a hand had gone in and taken what it wanted and left teeth marks of paper behind. Next to the ledger, a velvet bag slouched with a satchel's defeat. She loosened its drawstring and tipped its contents into her palm. Gold kissed her skin with its ridiculous, dense certainty. Not mint coins. These were hand-poured discs, assayer's work, little ingots hammered into the idea of coins. Each face carried a stamped mark, a circle enclosing a pickaxe, and beneath it, a single number. 1, 3, 7. Some were blank where a number should have been, as if a blow had been prepared and never struck. House tokens, she said. Scrip, or a vanity set for a saloon's high roller table. The academic in her catalogued possible articles on non-mint gold circulation in remote camps of the 1860s. The daughter in her counted without meaning to. 7 with numbers, 5 without, 8 with the stamped faint as a thumbprint. She didn't like that the count refused to settle the same way twice when she poured them back and forth. She wrapped the bag again, tightened it hard, and set it next to the ledger. The ledger did not give an inch under her fingernail. She resisted the urge to pry at the lock. There were rules to how you approached artifacts, and one was that you didn't break the mystery to get at it faster. She'd text June later, bring a scope, bring patience. June would laugh and tell her to bring a crowbar. The floorboards ticked under her weight as she walked the perimeter. Under the far window, the planks dipped slightly, like a shallow breath. She crouched and pressed her palm there. Cold rose from the seam. If there had been a fire in this room, and the black ghosts at the base of the back bar said there had, someone had repaired the boards in a hurry, and not quite to square. Her phone buzzed. Made it? June texted. Don't fall in a hole. Made it, she wrote back. Plenty of holes. Another message popped up before she could pocket the phone. Unknown number. Silas C. the text raid. Saw you roll in. I run tours, know the buildings. If you want a hand making her safe or profitable, call. No pressure. Town's friend, not a vulture. Promise. She glanced through the window. Across the street, a man leaned against a burnt red SUV, thumbs in his belt. He had the kind of charisma that didn't cost him anything. Worn denim, sun-browned skin, smile ready. He tipped 2 fingers off the brim of a hat he had no practical need for. Later, she said to the empty room, meaning him, meaning everything that wasn't the ledger, and the coins and the word on the glass. She took a rag and wiped a swath of bar clean. Under the filth, the wood was handsome, a run of old-growth plank that hadn't deserved this ending. She set the envelope, the ledger, and the coin bag in the cleaned rectangle, as if she were laying out implements for a patient. The act made the room feel less feral. Fine, she said. Let's see your reconciliation. She opened the county envelope again, looking for any other surprise clause, any other joke someone might have affixed to the binding. The codicil lay where it had been, quiet in its absurdity. Her father's note pressed the weight behind her sternum. It always had when he left her with a task that smelled like absolution. She read the first line of the deed aloud. Let these presents attest that I, Patrick Hollis, being of sound mind. The piano answered with a single perfect chord. Not the dull thud of a dead key, but a bright, full sound, all the way down to the belly of the instrument, the resonance traveling her bones. She did not startle backward because her body prioritized pressing stillness over panic. And a coin, one of the numbered ones, she could have sworn fell out of nowhere and struck the ledger with a small, deadly sound like the tip of a gavel. Draft, she said, because words were cheaper than admitting the hair along her forearms had lifted. Pressure change. Vibration off the highway. There was no highway. Prosper Gulch's last proper road had given up before she arrived. She put the coin back in the velvet bag, fingers moving automatically, and felt something soft catch in the drawstring. When she looked, a single hair-long gold as marigold beer curled around the knot. Not hers. Nobody she knew wore theirs that color that way. She set the hair on the bar. It lay there like a forgotten note of music. Lola, she said without thinking, because the town records had had a name in them once, recurring around pay ledgers and canceled performances at the Mercy. Lola Bright, singer. The syllables fit in the room like they'd been waiting. The front door creaked. She turned. Silas stood in the doorway, just inside the shade, hat in his hands. He didn't track dust across the threshold. That wasn't the kind of impression he made. "Miss Hollis," he said, "didn't want to spook you. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said. It came out neutral. Most people who'd known her father didn't say loss like they meant grief. They said it like they meant the ledger had come up short, and now the accounts required attention. "I've got a generator up in the shed by the old jail," he said. "Storms flicker this time of year, and the plumbing, well," he rolled his hand as if that entirely explained the concept of 19th century pipes. "If you're thinking of opening this to the public, even for research, there are things we can make safe. And there's money to be made. Folks love a good story that scares them, but lets them go home. I'm not thinking of opening it," she said. "I'm here to document. Then I'll see." He smiled in a way that included her in the joke he hadn't told yet. "Just saying I can help with either. Crane's the name. Silas. My folks have been here since before the Gulch had a name that stuck." She didn't let her eyes flick to the codicil, where Crane Estate lay in a font somebody had cut with a knife and a ruler. "I saw the tours online," she said. "Looks theatrical." "We call it interpretive history," he said. "It keeps the lights on." He nodded at her envelope and the ledger as if he knew where values lay. "That thing's a piece, huh?" "It's locked," she said, which is usually an argument for leaving it locked. "Or an invitation," he said, and laughed like he was quoting the building instead of himself. "Look, if you need anything, tools, hands, contacts at the county who know which drawer the ghost stories are filed in, I'm a call away." He tipped his hat again, adjusted it, because that was the gesture you made when you tried it on. "And if you decide to sell, there's a list of folks who'd make an offer before the snow. You don't want to be up here alone when the heavy weather hits." She looked past him at the sky. Heavy weather was weeks off. "I'll keep your number," she said, which was true in the way a historian kept every number until it proved either relevant or a distraction. When he left, the room let out the breath it had been holding. She locked the front door because that made a sound she could trust. She spent the next hour measuring with her eye and a tape mapping, where the bar's length refused to reconcile with the room's width, where the baseboards shook when a truck went past on the distant county road where the cold came from. She traced the seams with her fingers, learned the floor like a blind person learns a new hallway. Under the piano, the temperature dropped a degree, 2. She could feel it without needing a readout. The brass wheels had sunk inches into the boards over the years, as if the instrument had a weight far out of proportion to wood and iron. On the backside of the bar, someone decades ago, by the look of the oxidized scratches, had gouged a restraint into the wood, not initials, not a heart. A series of short vertical marks grouped in 7s. Tally. She put her hand flat over them like she could warm them enough to wipe them smooth. The wood stayed indifferent. She cleaned the space under the front windows for a camp cot and set her duffel there. It felt wrong to sleep upstairs. Bedrooms in places like this made promises they couldn't keep. She found the breaker panel in a closet and flipped both rows. 3 dead bulbs came to life like exhausted eyelids lifting. The light made everything uglier and more honest. She brewed coffee on a propane single burner by the back door, the flame an obedient blue. With the mug warming her grip, she sat on the bar stool closest to the ledger and looked at it as if the force of looking could unfasten the clasp. She thought of her father on this same stool, months ago. He'd been a good liar about small things, where he'd been, what he'd spent, why he hadn't called, and a bad liar about big ones. Bad because his eyes softened when the truth cut him, and he tried to make space for both pain and denial in the same sentence. Balance what I couldn't was the kind of line you wrote when the ledger wouldn't let you sleep. You couldn't or you wouldn't? She asked the empty room. The empty room didn't rate the distinction. She drew her notebook nearer and wrote a list because you put the chaos somewhere or it climbed on your shoulders. Initial objectives. Inventory. Secure. Document anomalies with dates, times. Locate seller. Identify Crane Estate reference. Research Lola Bright. Request county records on ad hoc courts, 1860s. The act of writing made the piano shiver sympathetically, as if the graphite traveled the distance from paper to string. The window fogged again. She stood and watched it build from nothing, an exhalation from nowhere, then wiped it with the heel of her hand. The mirror behind the bar held her as a double, present Mara and the version that had come to work and not to haunt. A coin-shaped spot of brightness appeared on the bar top where no sunbeam should touch. She leaned down, cheek close to the wood. A hairline fissure ran along a seam, the kind that happens when boards settle after they've been unnailed and relaid. Cold breathed from it, miner's breath, damp and metallic. Not below, she thought, for no reason she would admit. The seam was below. Of course, the seam was below. She pressed her palm there again, and the ledger gave a tiny sound, leather remembering a hand. Tomorrow, she said out loud, for the ledger, and maybe for whatever listened through it. You get tomorrow. Tonight, I am going to sleep and not make anything worse. She tucked the ledger and the velvet bag back into the drawer, turned the tiny lock, and palmed the key. The second iron key went under her pillow, because she wasn't yet above superstition. She turned off 2 of the 3 lights and left the third burning, a compromise with both sense and nerves. In the half-dark, the room rearranged its shadows to better watch her. She lay on the cot and stared at the plank ceiling until her eyes drew numbers out of knots. The piano's soundboard clicked once as it cooled. She thought, title conveyed upon reconciliation. She thought, Crane Estate. She thought, 7. The word that wanted to bloom on the glass waited in the black like a held breath. When sleep came for her, it came the way it always did in new places, at an angle, like a coin rolling, like it wanted to stop on its edge and refuse both sides. She dreamed someone counting with the soft, patient cadence of a bookkeeper who had all the time in the world. And somewhere near the bar, in the closed dark, a single key on the piano lifted and settled again with the lightest tap, no sound at all, just motion like a finger touching a name without saying it. The first thing that woke Mara was the hum, not the friendly, appliance kind, but a low, thick pressure that seemed to sit in her bones and wring them, the way a struck rim of glass sings. It had no source she could point to. The light she'd left on wore a tired halo. The ceiling planks ran the way they had all day, but in the dark, the knots were eyes. She listened to make sure the hum wasn't her own blood, then sat up on the cot and felt the air. Cold drifted from the bar, the way a river creeps at night. The piano offered 1 tick as wood settled, then stopped, as if it was waiting for permission to do more. Her phone said 2:17 a little past the hour when in old. Building remembers that it's more story than structure. She slid her feet into boots and stood, not turning on any more light. The hum thickened at the back of the room, toward the seam in the floor she'd found, and toward the back bar. She moved carefully, palm skimming the bar's edge, as if the room would spook if she came on fast. Breathing, she froze. It came from under the cot wet slow. She held still until the obvious occurred to her. She was between the sound and the cot. The breath dragged again, and she heard the shape of it change, long intake, ragged exhale, as if something had just adjusted its weight. She took 1 step back and tipped the cot up in one motion, braced for an animal or an intruder or nothing. The cot's legs clicked, canvas snapped, and the breath cut off mid-drag. Underneath, dust, thread of a spider web, a flattened bottle cap, a coin-sized pebble she hated immediately. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, that's cute." Her voice sounded like someone else's trying to cool a room with humor. The hum rolled under it, stubborn. She went to the mirror and wiped a circle in the fog with her sleeve. The glass didn't give. The word from earlier lay faint under the smear, the scored grooves of count still readable if she took a step left and let the light catch. This wasn't trick fog. This was an inscription. She turned away and almost stepped on chalk. It lay on the floor where she had not left it, a nub of carpenter's chalk, the color of pale bone. Next to it, a line, then another. A group of strokes that, taken together, made letters. Big ones, clumsy like a right-handed person writing with their left and too fast. She knelt. The chalked words ran in a line from the bar toward the door, then hooked, and ran back again, as if someone had paced and written, until they'd drawn a net across the boards. The letters read wrong to her eye serifs drooping, curves stiff. She scanned until she saw something legible. Graves at the end of one string, the first half of it backward. Severg, another Azurk Aled. She knew mirror script when she saw it. She looked up into the back bar mirror, because that was exactly the move the room wanted, and she was too tired not to make it. In reflection, the lines straightened. The reversed words snapped into names. Thyla Cruz, where Azurk Aled lay, and Hargreaves, where Severg. Ended. Not just names. A spacing between them that suggested blocks, and a gap at the bar that suggested a door. The total picture, because her brain couldn't help it, made a crude plan. Narrow rectangles lining up with the rear wall, a ribbon running behind the bar that was not the room she stood in. Service hall, she said. The old kind of saloon needed to move bodies and bottles without making a show of it. Everyone assumed mines meant below, but the map her sleeping hand had made pointed behind, and if the scale lied, maybe above. A hair stuck to the chalk, long and gold. She laid it next to the other hair on the bar, the way a curator keeps like with like. Then she fetched the small flashlight from her bag and followed the chalk-esque rectangles to behind the back bar. The mirror wasn't one piece. Up close, its tin backing had gone to black constellations around the edges. Where the lower molding met the plank, the wood darkened into an old stain shaped like a hand. She pressed there because her palm wanted to, and something in the wall gave just the smallest relief, the way a tongue lets a loose tooth move. A section of the mirror frame clicked. A crack opened along a seam she hadn't seen. She hooked her fingers and eased it farther, heart steady in the way it gets steady when it expects pain, and dosing to get it immediately. The panel swung out on hinges, lightless inside. Behind the back bar, space. A long, dust-swept slot of a corridor, the width of a man's shoulders, boarded tight to the exterior wall and running the length of the room. She aimed her flashlight and found hooks, shelves, a door with a porthole of glass blacked with paint. A borrowed cold lived in there, the kind that didn't belong to the night so much as to stone. The hum became a touch stronger, not louder, heavier. Helmholtz resonator, her brain offered, unhelpfully. Wind spilling across some void, turning the saloon into a jug you set your lip to. She filed the thought for June. If June were here, she'd give a number to the frequency and a lecture to the anxiety. The first shelf held nothing but brown glass and a few corks fossilized to the consistency of bread. The second held a tin of wax for boots and a folded apron with a faint, cleaned-out blood shadow on the bib. The third held an Edison cylinder phonograph, horn detached and set upside down like a hat. It could not possibly have been there in the saloon. As first decade 1877 put it across the line, but the Mercy had lived in its own centuries. Enough time had passed for later fashions to crowd in. Beside the machine, wrapped in muslin gone gray, lay 3 wax cylinders. Someone had tied them with string and labeled them in a hand finer than ledger print, a hand that cared about ink. Bright books on one, bright stage on the second. The third carried only bright. Mara lifted the first, and the chalk dust on her fingertips left a pale coat on the black. She felt the Evelyn wood of her skin, the quick education of touching artifacts, learned the cylinder's weight, its fragility. She set it gingerly on the player, fitted the horn, checked the stylus, because that is what you do if you've ever watched any archivist suffer through the sins of the impatient. The spring was half wound. She could feel it in the tension. She cranked it once, then twice. The machine answered with a little eager whir. She turned the lever. The needle dropped. A rush of air and noise like far rain. Under it, a woman's voice fought for the groove. The frequency of the saloon's hum wrapped around it, and for a second, Mara felt an insane certainty that the room was trying to tune itself to the recording. Books to balance, the voice said, barely there. Then clearer, as if the diaphragm found its range. They made me write it clean. Mara pressed closer to the horn. The voice was young adult, and older than that, lived in a town and wanted a city. Lola was in it, not the whole of her, but the corners. The machine squealed as if something in the groove had been cut twice. The voice dipped under the floor of audibility and rose again, all at once too near. If I wrote the names I didn't see, they could. The cylinder scraped, a chunk of groove gone. The phrase ended in a cut that felt aggressive rather than accidental. The machine spun steady as a heartbeat and gave her only hiss. Mara shut it off. The hum of the room laid itself back over her shoulders. She thought of the ledger's torn teeth of paper and the way someone had pulled pages, not neatly, but fast. She tried Bright Stage. This one found pitch sooner. Closing with Sweet By and By, the voice said with a tiny, performative laugh. A piano may be the very one in the other room plunked a scale. Mr. Hollis says the men like a hymn that leaves them generous. I say anything that lets them leave. Music bled in for a bar, and then that cylinder, too, skipped scars on wax, where a fingernail or a blade had kissed it. She set the second aside. Her right hand had smudged chalk on the machine's bed, and her left had dirt in the lines of the palm. She rubbed flake from under her nails, and grit came away red and brown, as if her sleeping hand had found the seam in the floor and pulled. She realized how thirsty she was, the kind of dry that comes from breathing through your mouth for a long time. When she turned back, the third cylinder, the one labeled only bright, was already on the spindle. No, she said softly, because she had not put it there. Not yet. And then, because the worst thing is sometimes to refuse the thing the room wants you to hear, she lowered the stylus. Silence for a few spins. The hum slid down half a note, or she imagined it did. Then a voice so close it popped the horn. I signed my name, then his. They told me my hand looked like the judge's when I was careful. I thought it would hide me. A breath, a small sob swallowed and re-swallowed until it disguised itself as a laugh. It didn't. The edges tore again. For 3 seconds, the machine gave her no voice at all, only the ache of recorded air. Then a whisper that had not belonged to the rest of the speech at all, like a head against the horn, like someone hiding. Don't go, B. The cut there was savage. The cylinder spun and said nothing else. Mara waited 3 full rotations in case there was a return. There wasn't. She shut it off and stood in the narrow hall, in the dark that followed, not moving. The hum lived in the doorway and the seam in the floor, and now in the long throat of the horn. She backed into the saloon and pulled the panel to, leaving the hidden corridor just barely ajar, because it felt wrong to pretend it wasn't there once you knew it was. The air in the room had changed in some way she could not justify, in direction maybe, in attention, Certainly. Her mouth tasted of metal. She went for water and felt something hard click against her teeth. She spat into her hand by reflex. A coin gleamed wet in her palm. Not a mint piece one of hers. A stamped circle, the pickaxe mark caught with saliva and light. The space where the number should have been was blank. She didn't remember putting it there. She did remember locking the drawer and sliding the key under her pillow and promising herself tomorrow. The key was in her other hand now, her fingers white-knuckled around it. She put the blank coin on the bar, and it rolled to a stop against the hair she laid out. It kissed it and stilled. The piano strings, untouched, sang very lightly, the resonance of the coin's metal against the wood. Perhaps, if you believed that everything could be explained, if you were patient and kind enough with physics. Her hand shook. She didn't like that. She dialed anyway. June answered on the second ring, which she would have made a joke about if it hadn't been 2:30 Tell me you didn't fall in a hole, June said, thick with sleep and immediately alert under it, like an engine that lights fast. Not yet, Mara said, but the building is singing. Wind? Feels like, but not the normal kind, probably infrasound. Wind over a shaft or through a busted vent turns a space into a low-frequency source. You can't hear it, not really, but your body does. The eyes vibrate. You get dread. Rational thoughts stop liking you. June yawned and cleared her throat. You're surrounded by giant wooden Helmholtz resonators, bar cavities, piano, bottles, room volumes. A town is basically an organ with PTSD. That's comforting, you asked. Put a glass of water on the bar. If the surface ripples without visible cause, you've got a pressure wave. If you can locate the shaft and box it out, you can kill most of the effect. Mara did as told. The water stilled, then ticked with tiny tap-taps that made a rhythm 7. She thought unhelpfully, though she tried not to count. I found cylinders. A woman's voice, Lola. June went quiet because she knew when to shut up and let something be the size that it was. She says they made her write it clean. She says her hand looked like the judge's. June, she says his. Not which his. It cuts before she finishes Don't Go Be. Below? June supplied. Too fast. Maybe. The word fit, but Mara didn't want to give it to the room yet. There's a hidden corridor behind the mirror. It runs the length of the bar. There's a door in it that leads somewhere else. I haven't opened it. Wait for me. I wasn't asking, Mara said automatically, reflex weirding itself into an affection. When can you get here? Sunup if I skip showering. Noon if I smell human. Sunup, Mara said. The room did not want her to be alone with it, and hearing herself say sunup made her realize that she had already decided not to be the kind of person who pretended she could carry this alone. Text me a pin, June said, and don't put strange metal in your mouth till I get there. Mara looked at the coin and then at her hand and didn't answer. After she hung up, she took photos, the chalk names, both ways, the panel ajar, the machine with the horn, and the cylinders rewrapped and laid neatly, as if the courtesy would make up for the theft of their sleep. She dried the coin and put against instinct, not back in the velvet bag, but beside the ledger where she could see it, the blankness where the number should have been made a small, mean absence on the bar. She took one step toward the cot and then went the other way. The front door still held. The windows turned the night into a mirror. The hum gave one long, gentle sigh and then another. She knelt in the doorway to the hidden corridor and put her ear to the gap. Air touched her face like a whisper you lean in to hear. Tomorrow, she said again to the ledger, to the coin, to the voice in the wax, to the room that kept its own books. We open the door tomorrow. She righted the cot and lay down with the small key under her palm, because her body wanted to pretend it could solve anything by pressing on it. She closed her eyes and told herself to think about articles and grant, budgets, and whether a codicil like the one in the deed would even survive a test in court. The piano let two strings hum against each other softly, the kind of dissonance that resolves if you let it, and then petty, pleased, doesn't. When sleep found her this time, it fetched her by the hand. She walked obediently. She could feel the chalk in her dream, the way it dragged on wood, the way capital letters felt when you wrote them like you were copying them from someone else's better hand. She could hear counting in a voice that wasn't hers. Not the house's, not her father's, not Lola's, and yet each of them layered as if the cylinder had cut grooves, one on top of another. Somewhere just to her left, in the narrow slot of a space she now knew existed, a door latched with the careful click of someone who had practiced being quiet. The building's low note held. It sounded, finally, like a throat. It sounded like it was trying to get a word out. Dawn came up thin as tea. The saloon's low hum had settled to a suggestion, the way pain does when your attention wanders. Mara stood at the front door waiting for June, watching the street invent a little morning. One truck rolling through, a dog trotting without a collar, a long moment where nothing moved and the whole town felt posed. June pulled in with two travel mugs and the sort of duffel that said she trusted tools more than faith. She took in the building, then Mara's face, then the light left on over the bar. "You look like you slept a generous 40 minutes, June said. "Show me your haunted organ." Mara let her in, the air shifting around them. The room smelled a little different in daylight, less mouse, more old yeast. "Infrasound first," June said. She set a glass on the bar and slid her phone next to it with an app that did not, strictly speaking, need to be trusted to be useful. If the water trembles and we can make the signal correlate, then you're not crazy. You're a victim of architecture. The surface quivered in tiny cymbal ripples when the wind rose, settled when it fell. The phonograph obliged with a slow wobble near 10 hertz. Seeing a number made the building feel fractionally domesticated. "Helmholtz," June said, pleased to have a named thing to hold. She went to the back windows, stuck her head into a gap at the sash, and made a quick face. "You've got a broken vent, and it's coupling with basically everything hollow." She pointed at the piano, the bottle cavities, the bar. "We can tape off the worst leak for now. It won't cure the weird, but it'll melt some of the dread." They did it together, June on the sill with painter's tape from her kit, Mara holding the frame steady. The room's pitch rose and then thinned as the vent lost its voice. The new quiet was still old, but it was less intimate. Mara showed June the chalk names on the floor and the mirror trick. June crouched, running a fingertip above the strokes without touching. "Sleep writing, huh?" Then in the mirror, "These are laid like a plan. Service hall? Behind the bar," Mara said. She swung the back bar panel. In day, the hidden corridor felt narrower. Real light stole illusion. Dust showed its depth in thin drifts, like snow in corners. June whistled once, then cut herself off, unwilling to give the space a tune to borrow. They followed the slot to the interior door with its blacked porthole. June pressed her ear. Mara watched the glass. Neither admitted they were waiting for a breath. The handle refused to turn paint weld in time. The wood around the latch showed scarring, as if a previous hand had gone hard at it and lost patience. "Leave it for now," Mara said, hearing her own restraint like a promise she might not keep later. "There's a corridor. That's enough truth for one morning." Back in the barlight, June's gaze snagged on the ledger like a magnet finding a nail. "Oh, hello, heart of the matter." She tested the clasp without forcing it. "Tiny lock. No key?" "Not for this," Mara said. "Drawer, yes. Ledger, no." June nodded. "We don't pick it. Not unless the county signs off or the devil asks nicely." She angled a flashlight across the leather so the glare ran low. "But we can see if someone worked it over." Oblique light made textures talk. Shallow grooves cut into the cover tally marks, grouped in sevens, the same as the underbar gouges. The page edges showed a pattern Mara had ignored in exhaustion. Near the center, a bank of leaves had been ripped out toward the foredge. The tear scallops pointed inward, like a mountain range. June tapped the edge with a fingernail. Pages came out in a hurry. Like the cylinders were cut, Mara said. Write it clean, June echoed. Whoever cleaned wasn't a conservator. They began a systematic search, gentle enough to keep shame away later. Behind the register till they found only rusted teeth and a desiccated moth. In the bottom of a flower tin light, as Rumor Mara's fingers touched paper that crumpled but held, she drew out a slim notebook bound in cheap cloth, a daybook. Columns labeled drink, room, fine, other ran down the left. Names on the right in a neat slanted hand ink looping with a singer's care. The last page broke off jagged. The first few carried a watermark of grease. Lola, Mara said, before she proved it. The B in bright on one page matched the capital B on the cylinder labels. The same high loop, the same economy in the tail. The pen pressure rose evenly on downstrokes, the sort of control you get when you write for counting. Midway through the book, the script changed, not a different hand entirely overwriting. The neat names sat under broad, heavier letters, like someone had traced them with a clumsy pen to unify spellings or align columns. In some entries, the original ink had been scraped with a blade and written over, leaving fibers roughed and a faint brown. It could be iron gall reacting to time, or it could be a hurry. After the corrections, the numbers in the other column swelled. In the fine column, zeros appeared where dashes had been. 2 layers, June said, original and revision. Your double books. Mara turned a page and found a whole line missing name torn free, leaving the edges fuzzy. The total for the day still stood, as if the sum had to survive, even if the man didn't. In the margin, a small mark, a circle with a pickaxe the same stamp as the coins. Next to it, a number 5 that had been written, then rubbed, then written again slightly darker, slightly wrong. Someone made the story match the math, Mara said, or made the math match the story. They photographed every page as if it might combust for spite. June's engineer brain insisted on redundancy 2 devices, 2 angles, metadata noted. The soft whir of the phone camera sounded like a respectful insect. Near the back cover lay a folded receipt brittle enough to fracture if you breathed on it. Mara slid it onto a clean, stiff envelope and lifted the flap. Poker stake advance at the top in the neat hand. 8 names below, 7 with amounts. One scratched out so closely she had to tilt the paper to catch the light in the scraped fibers. The total left a gap that, when she traced it with a pencil in the air, made the math balance only if the missing name had matched the others. 8, June said, but the town story is 7. Mara thought of the piano's 7 perfect hammers, and the gavel count beat in her bones. Stories like odd numbers, she said. They sit prettier. They broke for a breath that pretended to be coffee. Outside, a truck downshifted on the grade. The sound came through the building with a shiver, not unlike the hum, then passed. Show me the cellar, June said. The door to it was half hidden behind a rack of broken chairs. The top step sighed in a way that made both women test their weight and their will. The air down there wore last night's cold more heavily, and something else char and wet ash, trapped far past reason. Mara flicked on a headlamp and let the beam move slow. Fast light makes lies look like possibilities. The stairwell opened into a low room crossed by joists blackened from fire. Char formed V patterns rising up toward the beams, pointing back to a corner where a barrel sat half collapsed like an animal that had given up. Glass lay puddled in one place where heat had been hot enough to fuse labels into lichen on the stone. Above the corner, the wallboard bubbled where flame had licked but not eaten through. Origin here, June said quietly. Look at the V's. Heat cone points from this, not to it, which means the stove flare, or lantern knocked over story is backwards. This was set, or it started in a way that isn't friendly. Mara stepped closer. The barrel's iron hoops had pitted where someone had struck them hard, dented in a pattern not quite random. On the floor next to it, a circle of black marked what might have been a brazier pan or a coal scuttle set too long. The mark had a clean edge, as if a ritual wanted to be a domestic accident. She let the headlamp wander across the joists. In the soot near the stair, someone had run their fingers once, 2 quick lines side by side like a pause mark. The gesture felt recent. She didn't like that thought, so she put it away. At the far wall, a framed opening had been sealed with newer lumber grain different, nails different, urgency different. The line where old met new had been caulked with something that had aged from flexible to stubborn. Not a window, June said. An access. Not below, Mara said under her breath, and then pretended she hadn't. They climbed back up slower than they'd gone down. The saloon's air felt thinner after the cellars. June set the daybook on the bar under glass from a picture frame they stole from a painting of a horse, as if the extra layer could keep loss from swallowing it. Footsteps sounded on the porch. The door knocked politely twice, then opened halfway. The man who stepped in carried a deputy's star and the kind of calm you learn in small places where everybody knows who your mother was. He took his hat off, saw both of them, and put his expression where it belonged. Courteous, cautious. Miss Hollis? I'm Mateo Rivas, he said. Deputy. Welcome to Prosper Gulch. I saw the light in your car and figured I'd introduce myself before the town does it wrong. Mara shook his hand. It was dry and warmer than hers. We're keeping out of trouble so far, she said. Mostly. His gaze found the ledger, and then didn't linger, the grace of a man who knows not to stare at grief or money. I'm here for 2 reasons. One, safety. This building's had a habit of doing what it wants. If you're planning any opening or demolition, I need to be looped in. He glanced down the hall toward the back bar, where the panel sat slightly ajar and did not ask about it, which made Mara like him. The other reason? June asked. Rivas tipped his hat rim at the daybook. History. I grew up on the stories like everybody else. The 7 struck big and skipped, he said, like a tour guide selling a laugh. I've also spent enough time in records to know stories tend to skip certain details. He nodded to the cellar door. Like where the fire started. You think it was set, Mara said, to see how far he'd go. I think somebody wanted smoke in the street while something else happened out of sight, Rivas said. And I think folks in town got used to curating that into a tragic accident, because accidents don't ask for apologies. Curating, June repeated, looking at Mara. Rivas's smile tilted. Silas Crane is going to come by with a welcome basket and a weekend calendar. He's not a bad man. He is an investor in our narrative. He trims it to keep the tips in the jar. If you hear him tell it, the 7 were cheats and the house was justice. If you hear their grandchildren tell it, the house was something else. Grandchildren? Mara asked, careful. Of the town, he said, softening it. We're all kin to the Gulch, one way or another. He handed her a card with his cell on it and a note on the back. County Archive T. Clerk on vacation. Call me. The handwriting was neat without sugar, the kind a man writes on ticket books and condolence notes. My ask is you keep me looped, he said. If you open any doors that look like they haven't been opened in a long time, call. I'll get you the permits for any real work. And if you want the accident reports from the 1870s, I know which drawer doesn't stick. He turned to go, then remembered and turned back. Sorry for your loss, he said, and meant it. Your dad was polite. He considered and chose the word again. Polite. He never took a swing at anybody he couldn't pay back. When he left, the room held the outline of his absence for a second. June exhaled. I like him, she said. He speaks in phrases that could go on a badge. Silas arrived 20 minutes later with a paper bag that smelled like biscuits and jam and PR. He took in June as boots, and the way the daybook lay under glass with a photo of a horse, now carouseling on the wall, and recalibrated his smile to teen instead of Mark. "Brought you something," he said, "so you don't have to live on jerky and ghosts." "We were just discussing narratives," Mara said. She watched him watch the ledger without looking like he was watching the ledger. He dropped the bag on the bar, and the coin sheet he left there ticked once against its lip. His gaze flipped to it. "House tokens," he said, too breezy. "People love a prop." "They're not props," Mara said. "They're accounting." Silas spread his hands. "Everything up here is accounting. Who got paid? Who didn't? Who left a tab? And who never got to leave?" He shrugged, amiable. "You open this place as a memorial museum, and it hell put a soft carpet under 3 restaurants. You open it as a live haunt, and I don't mean Party City I mean interpreting the past with respect and timing, and you could keep the lights on for the rest of the block." "Interpreting," June said, tasting the word. "Curating," Mara said, watching him. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that said he knew all the synonyms for selling without shame. "If you want a list of electricians who want to burn your building down while pretending to fix it, call me." He slid a card across. "Either way, welcome." After he left, June opened the bag. The biscuits were good, which complicated things. They went back to work like people who believe activity prevents haunting. June took the daybook and began a clean transcription, speaking the names under her breath, the way you read a list before you memorize it. Mara laid the receipt with the scratched-out name beside the coins. 2 coins sat numbered, 5 sat blank, 8 were faint. The count refused to feel stable, like the numbers had a right to move when you weren't looking. She returned to the back bar mirror to orient herself. For a heartbeat, 7 seated shapes showed in the glass, a posture of men at rest with their backs to no one. She turned fast. The room behind her held only the chairs, empty. When she looked back, the mirror showed what mirrors should. "Don't chase the tricks," she told herself, not unaware of the irony. By late afternoon, the table filled with notes. They had a map that put the service hall behind the bar, a cellar origin for a fire that should have started at a stove, but didn't, a daybook that wore 2 hands, and a deputy who preferred truth to tourism. They also had a locked ledger whose key they did not have, and a door they would not open. Yet, June capped her pen. "Tomorrow we take rubbings," she said. "If there are impressions in the torn section, we can lift ghosts of the handwriting and see which names someone tried to subtract." Mara thought of the cylinder whisper. "They made me write it clean." She thought of her father's neat hand and the way his letters always looked like he was auditioning for a job he already had. She thought of reconciliation written in a codicil that had no business in law and every business in myth. "We're going to have to decide whether to publish as we go," she said, "or whether to finish the count before we tell the town what we found." "Your house seems to prefer complete sets," June said, and nudged the blank coin with the knuckle back into the tidy row. It rolled, defied level, and stopped nose to nose with the numbered 7. They left the corridor ajar, again rather than pretending ignorance. They turned on one light and not the others. Outside, evening cut the heat into long bands. Inside, the building tuned itself back to a lower note. "Tomorrow," Mara said to the ledger, to the door, to whatever kept tally. "We lift what was erased." The piano's action creaked a fraction, as if someone invisible settled on the bench, rested their hands on the keys, and waited for the count. Morning drew a clean line through the dust. The saloon had shed the night's intimate dread for a museum sort of quiet, the kind that asks you to read the plaques before you touch anything. June propped the door with her boot and came in carrying a roll of tracing vellum, soft graphite sticks, a cheap macro lens that clipped to a phone, and a flat panel LED she used for oblique light. Today, she said, setting up at the bar like a field lab, we lift everything the room thought it hid. Mara laid the daybook under the picture frame glass they'd stolen from the horse painting, both to press it flat and to make herself behave. The ledger remained locked in its cradle, its smaller keys snug in Mara's pocket, the clasp key still missing. But there were other ways to listen. Impression lifting. Why now? Why this way? Proper forensics would have used an ESDA electrostatic detection to raise indentations. They had charcoal, vellum, and patience. The night cylinders had told them what to look for. The daybook's double handwriting told them who to look for. If someone had traced and scraped names to clean the books, the pressure of the original pen would still live as shallow valleys in the paper fibers or the blotters used underneath. June slid a sheet of vellum beneath the last, untorn leaves of the daybook and another over the backboard of the bar where a clerk might have signed a slip on an unlucky day. She set the LED at a low rake so shadows would crawl across microtopography. Light low, she said. Graphite dust gentle. You're not drawing. You're letting the paper speak. Mara breathed out and worked the graphite in small circles, letting gray mist settle. At first, nothing. Then a pale architecture of indentations began to appear. Lines where a hand steadied itself, the tight loops of careful capitals, the long slur of an S that wasn't Lola's. She worked a second area, then a third. Names, June said softly. Look at that. They came up from nowhere like fossils in shale. Hargreaves, de la Cruz. Kohler in a German hand, then corrected to Kohler by someone who didn't care about umlauts. Nils Anderson with an extra S night mended by a heavier pen. Isaiah Bell in clean strokes. M. O'Rourke with a period added in another ink. W. where Mara suspected Lee Wen had been reduced to an easier syllable by a clerk who took what he wanted from other men's names. 7 indentations, each aligned with a day in the daybook where the other and fine columns went strange. Mara copied them into her notebook in her own hand, careful not to steal the shape of the script. She said them aloud by habit, the way an archivist memorializes while she catalogs. As she spoke each name, the piano offered a single soft string, not a full note, just the sympathetic tremor of wire. 7 names, 7 tremors. The room was counting with them. June adjusted the light and pointed with the eraser of her pencil. This trace here, see how the first pass is fine and the second is heavy? That's your eraser hand. Lola's writing is neat, balanced. This is someone copying neatness with pressure. Mara swallowed, tasting iron. The moment the graphite made the names visible, the back bar mirror fogged at the edges, and then cleared in one horizontal swath as if a cloth had been drawn across it from the other side. When the angle caught, letters showed where the glass had been faintly abraded sometime long before, not below. Okay, June said, backing up a step out of instinct rather than fear. That is not condensation. It is also not subtle, Mara said. The message, not below, had hung on the shredded end of a cylinder in the night. She had refused to give the word to the room then. The room had kept it anyway. Not below the mine, June said, thinking like a map. People assume prospectors got themselves swallowed. That may be the story, because the town needed something bigger than a room to blame. Or not below the floor, Mara said, and the thought took space no matter how gently she set it down. The song in the wood June opened the bright stage cylinder and fitted it on the machine again, her hands careful in a way Mara would always be grateful for. The first seconds came out at the wrong pitch. The room tried to find the note again, the bottles vibrating a little on their shelves. Then Lola's voice rose with practiced courage. A bar of hymn, a swallow. The piano in the saloon, mute for a century, answered with a minor key echo no living hand made. It wasn't a tune, not yet. It was muscle memory in wood and wire, nerves remembering a song. She's pushing, Mara said. not to scare us off. To point. As warnings go, carving your memo pad is effective, June said, eyes on the mirror. They moved into the service hall again, daylight flattening its menace, but not its wrongness. At the far end, the blacked porthole in the inner door held its shine like a coin. June pressed her palm lightly to the center of the panel and tapped near the base with the back of a spoon from the bar. Hollow, she said, but too hollow. Listen, double cavity. Floor space floor. She clipped the macro lens to her phone and shot detail of the nail heads along the baseboard. Old square-cut iron here, modern wire nails there. The seam between boards had new caulk feathered over old. In the cellar below, they had seen V-pattern char pointing to an origin. Here, they saw what most amateurs miss, an addition laid over a wound, stitched quick after a cave-in or a secret, and then painted to pass as original. Sub-basement, June said. No way in the Sanborn maps this building has one. Rivas solved that before they asked. Mara's phone buzzed. A photo popped up, faded fire insurance map from 1912, block and lot sketched. The prospector's mercy, marked with a square, no hatch for basement. Rivas followed with a text. Blueprints show crawl space only. Anything deeper is later or off books. Don't open anything load-bearing until I'm there. Mara thumbed back. We'll wait, saying it made it true for an hour. Clean the books when they returned to the bar. The pile of velvet-sheathed coins lay exactly where Mara had left it, except the blank coin had shifted to rest on the corner of the daybook. It wasn't impossible. Floors tilt. It also wasn't likely. Stay with the impressions, June said, steering them back to work the way you steer yourself back to shore after you notice the current. They worked the underside of the daybook now pages that, when a hand pressed hard enough, would have received echoes of the name above. In one leaf, faint and shaky, the beginnings of low. Then L.A., a purely rational reading, said a clerk had tested a pen. A more honest reading said a woman who had reported the accounts had signed her name quietly on the wrong page, by reflex or defiance. Behind it, carved almost to bruise the paper, a different hand had pressed count deeper than a normal note, like an instruction. Mara's wrist prickled. She lifted the paper, and for an instant, the room slid sideways. She stood at the bar in 186, her hands not her hands, her skin smelling of soap and coal smoke. The ledger lay open. The page carried the same rules: drink, room, fine, other, but the pen in her grip shook because a blade kissed the soft inside of her wrist where a man's hand held it. Someone stood just behind her shoulder. A second someone stood across the bar with a gavel, lifted not quite high, a silhouette more than a face. The foreman's bracket of fingers dug into her elbow, while he said almost sweetly, "Round it up, Miss Bright. Make it even. Make it clean." The piano on the stage played two notes because someone leaned on it while turning, bored and a little drunk. She looked down and understood the bargain. Write names you did not see, rewrite the ones you did, so the money flowed how it should not, and the night might leave you with your skin intact. A blade traced her vein as if it could read. Keep the totals, the gavel figure said. His voice had a church in it that had forgotten mercy. Keep the house from loss. Mara pulled back hard enough to scrape the chair. The bar came back in time and color. June was close, hand up but not touching, eyes a little wider than usual. Here, June said softly. Sip, breathe, tell me the usable parts. Mara did. As she spoke, the knife, the gavel, the stupid two-note chord, the back bar mirror fogged at the bottom, and a new stroke etched faintly into it, unrolling not as letters this time, but as a shape, a little scale, two pans balanced. She watched the line finish itself and tried not to think of judges, of initials burned into the ledger by heat that hadn't happened yet. Whoever forced her, June said, needed an alibi the books could provide. And the day the men went missing, the totals would look correct, because they'd been made to match a story. That means your ledger is more than artifact. It's a weapon. And you don't hand the town a weapon until you understand which way it points. Mara looked at the 7 names they'd raised. She spoke them again, a litany. The piano answered each in its thin, obedient way, wooden nerves ticking. On the 7th, a key beside middle C pressed itself down a hair and settled back like a breath that did not quite become a note. Lola's on our side, Mara said, hearing the certainty in her voice and the uncertainty beneath it. She's warning us where to look, so we don't waste hours in mine shafts. Not below, June said, almost to the glass. They broke the day with necessary errand sandwiches. A coil of caution tape, the kind of permit application, Rivas would bless later, and returned to find Silas leaning on the porch rail, smiling like a man who could smell momentum. He carried a toolbox he hadn't been asked to bring. Afternoon, he said. Heard a rumor a certain saloon is breathing again. We're busy, Mara said, which was both true and a kindness. Busy is good, he said. His eyes flicked to the bar, to the velvet bag, to the way the blank coin now lay snug up against 7 numbered ones. Make sure you're busy keeps folks safe. Floors like these like to swallow the uninvited. He tipped his hat to June and left as if he had accomplished something by doing so. After he went, the blank coin rolled uphill 1/2 inch and kissed the edge of the ledger clasp. The survey June opened her duffel like a magician on a mission and brought out a laser level, a short plumb line, and a handful of steel ball bearings. I want to see the slope, she said, setting the level and marking reference ticks. The line on the wall dropped true. The bar settled a degree off. Old buildings lean. But the lean changed at midroom, as if the floor thickness changed. She let a bearing go in one corner. It rolled clean, clicked a threshold, and then disappeared into a crack with a sound that wasn't the sound of wood swallowing. It sounded like wood, space, wood. Double deck, she said. There's more than a crawl space down there. Somebody added a layer after a cave-in or a renovation or a trial, Mara said, and hated that she was probably right. They chalked the soft spots and taped off a rectangle where Junie's walk sounded wrong, a hollow that didn't he belong on the Sanborn. They did not open it. The day had rules now. Gather, don't trigger. As afternoon slid toward gold, Mara placed the vellum sheet with the 7 raised names on the mirror's ledge, propping it like a family photo. The glass behind it held not below and the faint scale. The hair she'd found lay beside the coin, its color warmer in this light. Tomorrow with Rivas, June said, tapping the taped square with the toe of her boot. We open the wrongness. We do it with bracing, with proper tools, and with a second opinion that has a badge. Mara nodded. The ledger sat between them like a chest of breath. She put her palm on it, felt the leather take her heat, and returned none. The piano offered a 2-note lullaby without melody. She could almost hear the rest of it, the part where a stage singer turned a hymn sideways and fit it to a room of men who wanted to believe in mercy without having to practice it. Lola, Mara said softly, not to summon but to thank. The back bar mirror clouded once, cleared, and left the faintest additional scratch below the words, like someone trying to start a letter and thinking better of it. They turned 2 lights off and left one on. Outside, the heat peeled away from the street in sheets. Inside, the room lowered itself a half step and waited. Tomorrow, Mara said, to the tape, to the coin, to the ledger that would not open, and the names that had. We count where you point. The coin gave a small, satisfied tick against the clasp and lay still. Deputy Rivas arrived with coffee that tasted like duty and a stack of forms he promised to file after they didn't die. He wore the expression of a man who had agreed to be present for sense, not spectacle, and a hard hat he offered without apology. Sanborn shows no basement, he said, laying the 1912 fire map on the bar and smoothing it flat with 2 fingers. If there's a room down there, it's later or off the books. We brace, we cut small, we look, and we quit the second the building says quit. June had already marked the taped rectangle, where the floor sounded wrong. She dragged in 2 drywall jacks, set them under the nearest joists, and extended them until wood groaned and then settled. Belt and suspenders, she said. If we like living. They took rolls without needing to rehearse. June on tools, Rivas on safety and line management, Mara on documentation, and the small careful jobs that felt like prayer. June scored the boards with a multi-tool short gentle bites that made dust like old flour, and eased up a square of plank with a flat bar wrapped in tape to keep metal from scarring wood. Cold breath through the gap, miner's breath again, this time with the bitter tang of old ash and iron. Mara leaned in with a flashlight and her phone set to video. The beam fell on space where the earth should have been. A second deck of flooring lay 2 feet below, patched with mismatched boards and propped on mine timbers, cribbed into rough columns. Between the layers, a black emptiness large enough to swallow a body and a century's worth of rumors. Double floor, June said. She sounded satisfied the way engineers do when the math matches the noise. Rivas clipped a line to June's harness. You step where I tell you, or you come up like a fish, he said. He banged his palm twice on the boarding. We don't trust any board that acts like it wants attention. June swung her legs through the opening and lowered herself onto the second deck. The plank under her left boot flexed, then gave with a noise that sounded too much like a decision. For a breath, her weight hung in the air. Then the board snapped, and she dropped through the second layer knee-deep into black. Rivas hauled instinctively. The line snapped tight, and June's fall stopped with a sound that was all wrists and breath. Got you, he said, already braced, every muscle in his arms sending back the same message. Left ankle, June said through her teeth. Some things... Her sentence strangled itself. The line went taut at her ankle, as if a hand had taken hold. Rivas looked at the rope and saw no one. It pulled again, slow and patient. June's boot scraped wood. Splinters kissed her calf. Mara dropped to her stomach and reached down without thinking. Her fingers found fabric, then skin, then a loop of old hemp that had somehow found her ankle and decided to be useful. She worked at the knot and felt it tighten in response to her touch. Don't ask, she said, and slipped her pocket knife under the strands. The rope fought the way living rope does. She cut anyway, clean and fast, and the tail whipped her wrist as if offended. The line to Rivas went slack enough for him to lift. He hauled, June scrabbled, and then she was belly on the second deck again, breath shuddering. It would have been easy then to say we're done. Rivas looked at their faces and didn't. We quit when the building says quit, he repeated. Not when the scare says quit. If we stop now, Silas will be down here tonight with 4 teenagers. And a flashlight, and the house will balance on them instead. It wasn't fair, which is different from not being true. June nodded, jaw set. Give me 10 minutes, she said, and tested the next plank with the careful weight of a woman who had no intention of falling again. They widened the cut, added a second opening, and set a ladder. Rivas went first this time, boots on timbers, light sweeping. Room, he called. Not a crawl space, 7 by 15 maybe. Low headroom. Built like someone who understood mines, but had no business practicing architecture. Mara followed, moving slow under the feeling of the building's attention. Her light found walls made of plank, whitewashed once and then bruised by hands. At the far end, 3 crates stacked into a makeshift dais with a strip of molding nailed to the front, as if to give it dignity. On it lay a wooden mallet, no larger than a meat tenderizer, handle polished by many grips. She did not pick it up. The room had seats, not chairs, but stools, 7 of them in a shallow U, each broken in the same way, as if the leg under the sitter's right knee had been kicked. A single stool leg stuck up like a jagged tooth where a seat had shattered. On the wall behind the stools, Tally marked sets of 7 round in clusters, then stopped as if someone's will had. Courtroom, Rivas said. He didn't have to light the word to make it fit. He angled his light down and found a dark ring on the floor directly before the crates, the size of a basin, black sinking to red at the rim. Brazier, June said. Or an ink pot big enough for a church. Or a bowl you hold a coin over, Mara said, and wished she hadn't. Along the left wall, a shelf held tin tags and a lockbox half shoved under a plank lip. The box was iron, small, the kind of thing a clerk keeps receipts in because he trusts metal more than people. It had rusted enough that the hinge surrendered with a sigh when Mara eased it open. Inside lay a set of compartments. 8, not 7. In 7, pairs, a ring or a pay-chit with a name scratched into tin, and one of the hand-poured coins stamped with the pickaxe. The rings were not wedding gold. One was a plain brass band. One a signet with its face filed smooth. One a braided bit of horsehair tied off with bent wire. The pay-chits bore names that matched the graphite they'd lifted. Hargreaves, De La Cruz, Anderson, Bell, O'Rourke, W. Lee, Kohler. In the 8th compartment, nothing. Its felt lining had darkened the way fabric does, where a favored thing is kept and then removed. Seizure, Rivas said, voice boxed thin by the room. Rings taken as identifiers. Chits and coin paired like a receipt. Accounting, Mara said, sick with the rightness. You bring the men down here. You try them until the totals make sense. You pair coin to name so the house books stay balanced on paper. Then you burn something or someone to make smoke enough for a street story. June touched one of the chits with a gloved fingertip, and the piano upstairs gave a faint single note, the kind you feel in your teeth. Rivas' light walked the wall and came to rest on a set of deeper gouges above the dais scale, carved with the same blunt instrument that had etched the mirror upstairs. Mara took photographs until the phone complained wide details, the way the light fell when she breathed, so she could remember scale later. She cataloged each compartment in a notebook with the habit of a person who understands that memory is faithless. Boots sounded on the boards above them. Then the hole's edge framed Silas, hands braced on his knees, hat pushed back, grin tucked away out of respect or prudence. He carried a pair of hard hats he hadn't been asked for. I heard the cavalry was here, he said. And by cavalry, I mean 2 women smarter than me and a cop who knows better than to keep good news to himself. Not open to the public, Rivas said without looking up. I brought gear, Silas said, offended by implication. He lowered a hat, then when Rivas didn't to reach for it, set it on the floor and climbed down like a man born to ladders. He slowed at the last rung and took it in the stools, the dais, the box in Mara's hand. His gaze sharpened, profound surprise, and did something truer. Calculation, quickly hidden. Well, hell, he said softly. You found the prayer closet. Courtroom, Rivas said. Depends who you ask, Silas said. Some folks pray best when they've already decided the answer. Mara watched the way his hands behaved when he tried not to touch. He gave the mallet a respectful berth, which told her he'd seen it before, or at least guessed what it was meant to be. He bent to the lockbox with the interest of a man who had profited from less proof than this. Don't, Rivas said. Chain of custody. Wouldn't dream, Silas said, and tilted his head to read the tin chits instead. Names. Hargreaves, De La Cruz. Well, look at that, the 7. He let the word sit long enough to become a claim. Town's going to have feelings. June had drifted to the far wall, where the plaster had been patched without finesse. She tapped and heard hollow, then stone behind it, the mine's side rib. They built this inside the saloon and against the earth, she said. Not below, behind and below. Mara shot Silas's face when June said not below. He held his expression where it was, but a small muscle worked in his jaw like an error being corrected. Take your pictures, Rivas said to Mara, not to hurry her, but to give himself a task he could name. Then we secure this and we all go upstairs and breathe ere the sunlight has met. Silas stayed aloft of the dais while Mara finished her shots. When she closed the box, he stooped, as if to be helpful, and palmed one of the blank coins that had fallen from the lip. He turned it in his fingers, the metal bright on his skin. Careful, Mara said. It's just a token, he said, and slid it into his vest with the faintest slight. It was practiced and nearly clean, the motion of a man who had uncounted coins before. Rivas didn't see it. June was still testing the wall. Mara filed the moment with the other debts. The air changed the way a room does when the pressure moves from somewhere to through you. A soft tap sounded on the dais, then another. Then 7 in total, the mallet never moving, the sound somehow arriving. Time to go, Rivas said, the authority not loud, just absolute. Dust lifted, drifted, and then rushed, as if a deep lung had exhaled. One of the cribbed timbers shifted with a crack, like a bone trying to make sense of itself. June was up the ladder before the third crack. Mara followed, pulling the lockbox with her because evidence that tells the truth should not be left with wood that has decided to forget you. At the top, Silas reached for the box as if to help. Mara kept it. The edge of the opening crumbled under Rivas's boot as he came through. He rolled and came up clean, efficient, his face not admitting the heart's hiccup under his ribs. Behind him, a section of double flooring gave up and fell in one piece to the room below, with the sound of sheets snapped out for a bed no one wanted to lie in. Silas coughed theatrically once the dust allowed it, then put a hand to the back of a chair, like a man whose balance had always been perfect until now. He watched Mara set the lockbox on the bar and watched Rivas tape the hole with yellow that whispered the word evidence even without letters. Chain of custody, Silas repeated, accepting the loss cheerfully. Smart. I'll put a sign on the porch, closed for reconciliation. He made it a joke, then took its measure when it wasn't one. Rivas took out his phone and began the clerk's parts of his job. Photos. A call to dispatch recorded on the line that would stand up in court. A message to the county archivist about controlled access. He wrote a single word in his pocket notebook. Court. The letters were square and dark. June sank onto a stool and unlaced her left boot. A red rope burn ringed her ankle, fibrous pattern printed on skin. It felt like it had purpose, she said, touching it once and then not again. Rope does, Rivas said. Runes do, Mara said, and set the 7 named chits in a row next to the 7 numbered coins from the box. They didn't fit exactly the numbers on the coins, were not a one-to-one with the names, but the pairing was a system, not a keepsake. The 8th compartment's empty print looked obscene. 8 seats, June said quietly. 7 broken. 1 missing. Or 1 waiting, Silas murmured, eyes friendly, voice not. Mara wrote 7 on a pad, and then drew a box next to it and left it blank. The bar mirror, kind under daylight, gave her back her face and a faint, patient scale scratched above the words, not below. The piano answered once with a thin note that told her nothing she didn't already know. The count was proceeding. The house had a taste for totals. Truth had been nudged forward, and in return something would be asked. Rivas closed his notebook. We'll post this and get a proper shoring team tomorrow, he said. No one comes in here tonight who doesn't belong. Silas nodded agreeably. I'll post a man. No, Rivas said politely. You'll post a sign. I'll post a man. Silas's smile carried no offense. As the law says. After he left, the room let go of a pinch they hadn't let themselves notice. June retaped her ankle, an engineer's tidy job. Mara set the lockbox under the bar, and slid a photo of the compartments into the daybook, careful not to crease the older paper. "Not below," she said aloud once, like a password to a house that counted everything you gave it. She made a list on the next blank page of her notebook. Secure sub-basement with Rivas. Shoring team. Controlled access. Catalog rings chits. Cross-check with county marriage claims. Trace 8th empty compartment missing ring chit coin. Do not move mallet. Watch Silas. He took a blank coin. Prepare for the ledger to respond. The sun slanted. The tape fluttered. The saloon's note lowered half a step. Content or calculating hard to know. The lockbox under the bar made a small sound, as if something inside had resettled by a fraction no tape measure could catch. "Tomorrow," Mara told the ledger, "because bargaining is a kind of faith. We inventory and we ask for the rest of the names." The mallet tapped once wood on wood, soft as a judge who knows the room can hear him without trying. The count was at 7. The ledger would want balance. And the house, patient as interest, was willing to wait for its 8th. By 9, the saloon had a new anatomy. 2 shoring towers sat like careful giants over the taped void. Rivas had posted a deputy at the porch and a notice that said, "Closed by order of county, the plainest magic available to mortals." June moved with the clipped calm of someone pretending her left ankle didn't send up sparks when she turned wrong. Mara felt the room's pitch different under the braces less grown, more listening. "Rule of today," Rivas said, laying down a tarp and a clipboard. "We catalog and we leave things where they are, unless chain of custody requires otherwise." "Which is the universe telling us to behave," June said, setting out nitrile gloves, calibers, and a jeweler's loop from a kit that looked like it had saved other people as pride in other rooms. They started with the lockbox from the sub-basement. Under the bar, Mara lifted it into the light. The 8 little compartments looked almost domestic with the dust off them, like a cutlery tray for a house that only ever ate one course. "Photograph first," Rivas reminded. He shot wide, then close. Each ring, each pay chit, each hammered coin paired to a name. The 7th pair sat tight as truth. The 8th space still wore the dark oval, where something had rested long enough to stain felt. June took the coins one at a time. "Just a peek," she said. She scraped a hairline on the rim of one with a needle file and touched a pinhead of acid from a tiny bottle to the raw metal. "Why do you have that?" Mara asked. "Because I make bad decisions at flea markets," June said. "And because gold likes to lie." The droplet beaded and held no fizz. "High carat," June said. She turned the coin in the loop's circle of light. "And look," casting sprue marks filed down. Whoever made these poured, clipped, and cleaned, and stamped them to look official. She checked another. Same. On the 3rd, the loop caught a fleck of something porcelain pale fused near the edge. June went very still. "That's not quartz." "What then?" Rivas asked. "Dental ceramic, or enamel," she said, voice down a notch. "And there those tiny cusps? Not hammer dings. They're the ghost of an occlusal surface." Mara's throat closed before her mind did the math. Not minted gold, not mind script. Melted mouths. The image of the bird at the threshold, with a pebble in its beak, slid into place like a coin into a slot. Rivas wrote 3 words in his notepad. Dental gold present. He underlined present. "Confiscation," he said quietly. "From the dead or from the living until they were." "Accounting," Mara said, because the word hurt the right way. The room pressed closer, as if pleased with their comprehension. They moved to the daybook again, the vellum with the 7 lifted names propped like a family portrait along the mirror frame. Under the glass, the words "not below" and the little scale etched yesterday had acquired faint companions. A notch like a gavel head, 2 parallel scratches like a tally begun and halted. June rewound the bright cylinder to hear what details might have hidden under last night, hum now that the worst of the infrasound was taped off. She adjusted the horn angle, nudged the speed. The machine found its throat fast today. Lola's voice came clear as thread through cloth. Thought if the books were balanced, they might leave me be. Thought if I wrote the names I didn't see, the town could sleep. Paper rasped in the background. A man's murmur, all consonant, like blessings spoken without belief. "Debt is the door, Miss Bright," another voice said, smooth and churchful. "When the debt is paid, you may go." The stylus hit one of the brutal cuts again, and the rest of the sentence died. The room took the line and kept it. Debt is the door. June shut the machine off. "They weren't washing books," she said. "They were building a lock." "Or a key," Mara said, and wanted her own metaphor back the second she said it. "In this place, keys found you." Rivas checked his watch, the porch, and his texts habit. "I have something you should see," he said, and slid a photocopy from a manila folder he'd brought up from the county. The paper had the slick feel of a clerk's machine, the image grainy but mean. Prosper Gulch Clarion, August 23, 1864. A column about recent disturbances and order restored. Near the bottom, a committee of safety convened in the prospector's mercy, presided by a Hollis ESQ, acting judge ad hoc. The books shall reflect our fairness. Marrow's name ran through her like fever. The initials A looked ridiculous on the page and entirely at home. "Your ancestor wasn't just the owner," Rivas said, not unkindly. He sat the box. Mara stared at the gavel notch on the mirror, at the little scale, at the daybook where Lola's fine hand and the eraser hand wrestled under each entry. She thought of her father's note in Chapter 1, "Balance what I couldn't." She thought of the codicil about reconciliation written into a deed that had followed county law around like a child tugging a coat. "My father knew," she said. "Or found out," Rivas said, "which brings me to my second thing. He hesitated in a way he hadn't hesitated when he lowered June into a hole. 2 months ago," he said, "your father was found here, on the floor by the bar. At first, we thought he fell, but the coroner's report reads blunt force head trauma, not consistent with the edge of the bar alone." I pushed for more. The state came back with inconclusive. We listed it accidental because we had no witness, and because the house had already taken more than it deserved from this town. The room narrowed, the way a lens narrows when the camera picks a face to love. Mara held very still, like a thing under a hunter's eye. "Where?" she began, and the piano answered before she could finish, with a soft two-note figure she had started to recognize as Lola's lullaby cut short. June moved closer and put a hand near but not on Mara's elbow. "We don't have to." "I need to," Mara said, and meant it in the way a person means I would go mad if I didn't. She worked, because work is a reasonable superstition. She made rubbings of the lockbox face. She cataloged the 7 rings and the chits. She cross-referenced the graphite names with the chits, spellings, and made a column for misrenderings W. Lee versus Lee Wen to correct later. She wrote Abel Hollis in her notes, and then crossed it through the way you strike your own name when you're done to want to invite something in. At noon, the heat laid down on the town like a quilt. Rivas stepped out to talk to his porch deputy and take a call from the county about permits. June limped to her truck for a brace and a protein bar. The saloon went to library quiet, the kind that edits your breathing for you. Mara sat at the bar with the daybook open to the page where Lola's script ran cleanest. She told herself she would close her eyes for 2 minutes and open them again when the machine sang its little end-of-cog whine from the cylinder. Spring running out, she slept, or the room took her. When she woke, she was standing behind the bar, her left hand wrapped around a wooden mallet that had not been upstairs when she closed her eyes. The handle's polish felt honest in her palm. A crescent bruise bloomed on the inside of her right wrist, 2 balanced ovals like pans of a scale. For a full count of 7, she could not move. Then the body obeyed again, and she set the mallet on the bar as if it might go off if jarred. The sub-basement was taped. The mallet had been left down there. They had sworn not to touch it. The room had moved it because she was too slow. June stopped dead in the doorway when she saw it. "Tell me you didn't." "I didn't?" Mara said. Her voice had a new texture, grain inside grain. "It wanted me to hold it." They stood, the three of them, Mara, June, the object, while the saloon tuned to the situation. The mirror fogged in a square around the mallet and cleared to show another faint etch. Pay beside the scale. Rivas came back in and folded all the new wrongness into his stance, like a man trying on a heavier coat. He approached, eyes on the bruise on Mara's wrist. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, which was not, strictly speaking, data. "It set me in place." "Nudge toward a reenactment," June said. "The house likes choreographies in tight spaces. It can't get a jury. It gets a witness." Rivas considered the mallet, the tape over the hole, the bruise. "This doesn't leave the bar," he said quietly. "We'll log that it moved. We'll make a note about unexplained transfer of evidence and secure it here until we can return it below. I'm not explaining to the county how a gavel walked up a ladder, and I am not letting the Cranes put it in a display case before we've given it a name." "Gavel," Mara said. The word fit better than mallet. It felt like calling someone by their legal name. She looked down and saw another new mark she had not felt happen. A small blot on the leather of the ledger's cover, the size of a fingertip, the color of old ink. Heat had raised what looked like a monogram in the blind stamped border 2 letters that only showed when light hit low. "A. Rivas," she said. He angled his phone light. The letters played hide and seek with the glare. "You seeing that?" June was already dropping the LED to a lower rake. The monogram showed, then faded as if embarrassed. "Invisible ink can show under heat," she said. "If somebody palmed this ledger with a warm hand for years, oils could have made a pattern. But this is a message." "From whom?" Rivas said. "From the person who loved the weight of his own authority," Mara said, and hated that she recognized the vanity. Abel signed the furniture. Silence set down in the room, and reorganized itself into the familiar counting quiet. They played the cylinder one more time, hunting for anything that would sketch the rules in firmer ink. Lola's voice arrived soft, cautious. He said as long as the books showed even, the town could sleep. A catch in her throat. He said the Hollis would answer if the house went short. The cut came again, as if the blade had been taught to slice on the word that would make it easy. They looked at each other because that's what you do when the floor under you is not the floor it pretended to be. Rivas spoke first. "Pattern says, when someone tries to tell the story without restoring what was taken, the house balances. Your father dug. He didn't finish. The house collected interest." Mara's hand tightened against the edge of the bar until the wood copied her grip. She remembered her father's decent lies, the way he kept small accounts tidy while letting the large ones float because he didn't have the spine to reconcile them. Balance when I couldn't wasn't poetry. It was procedure. She felt anger, then grief, and a clean line of purpose you could hang weight from. "What does restore mean to this place?" June asked. "Practical? Name them? Pay the families? Correct the record publicly? All of the above?" "Names first," Mara said, "because the piano always answered to those. Then we follow the money and put it where it should have gone." "And you keep the ledger away from Silas," Rivas said, "because if he burns the part he doesn't like, you'll just have smoke and the house will want to balance again." He scribbled something on his pad, tore the page, folded it, and slid it to Mara. "Do not say this aloud." She unfolded it where only she could read. "Silas has friends at county. Assume he knows the codicil and the reversion clause. He profits if you fail." As if conjured by his name, A text from Silas pinged Mara's phone. Big storm tonight. If you need a generator, I can wheel one up. Be ashamed to lose momentum. She put the phone face down. She could feel the blank coin Silas had palmed yesterday like a missing tooth in the mouth of the room. Work saved them again. They built a public ledger from their notes. A copy on cheap paper no one could steal without shame columns for name, evidence, correction, reparation. Due. Mara wrote Hargreaves carefully and pinned a photo of the chit below it. June wrote Lai Wen, recorded as W. Lee, then D. A. Lay Cruz Anderson, Isaiah Bell, M. O'Rourke, Kohler, correct, Kohler, Kohler, verify. Under reparation, they didn't write money yet, because they didn't know how to measure the cost of a century. They taped the copy to the back bar mirror over the etched words. The glass looked different with paper on it, less like a witness, more like a notice. Debt is the door, Mara said, trying the key on the lock. So we count what's owed where everyone can see it. The piano shivered a little, then offered one full note, the first that sounded like approval. Rivas packed to go file in person, the kind of filing you do so the paper doesn't get lost in a drawer that sticks. He paused at the mallet. You sure you're okay to sit with that thing? It's with me, Mara said. It's not on me. She kept her right hand flat on the bar where she could see the bruise. June put a brace on her ankle and kissed 2 fingers to the mallet's head as if to tell the room she knew the rules and was willing to play fair. I'll go pick up real braces and plywood, she said, and sand. If Silas thinks he's the only one who can shore history, he's due a surprise. When they were gone, the saloon and Mara measured each other. The coin on the bar, not from the lockbox, but from the velvet bag, rolled a half-inch and stopped with its blank face upward. A hair gold Lola's curled along the ledger's edge, caught by a static you couldn't discharge. Mara laid both palms on the leather. I'm not you, she told Abel under her breath. But I have your job now. It's going to be different. The gavel tapped once without moving, a sound like a corkroom training itself to silence. Outside, clouds were climbing the ridge in trouble-colored layers. Storm forecast making good on Silas's text. Inside, air tightened, the way it does when a building is getting ready to hold something. The house had stated its rule with a phrase and a bruise. Debt is the door. If she wanted to open it the right way, she'd have to carry names, proof, and a price. If she tried to leave without paying, the house would pick a body to balance with. It had already once. It had patience enough for interest. Mara checked the tape over the hole, the posted notice, the copied ledger on the mirror. She picked up the pen and wrote one more line under reparation due. Begin with truth. Pay in public. The piano answered with a low chord that sounded, for the first time, like a door unlatching. By late afternoon, the ridge had put on storm color slate stacking over pewter, a bruise of green where he'd tried to hold the sky to itself. The shoring towers in the saloon took the weight with patient shoulders. The public ledger Mara and June had taped to the back bar mirror columns for name, evidence, correction, reparation, do look like a poster for a small-town fundraiser if you didn't read the names. Wind shouldered the porch. The room's low note thickened, not the sick infrasound of the first night so much as a key change. The day had given them facts. The weather aimed to ask for a decision. Rivas returned with stamped forms and a thermos. Counties filed the closure. He said, We've got the room till morning. He looked at the clouds, assuming we keep a roof. June had the gavel wrapped in muslin and nested in a crate on the bar where everyone could see it. If thunder shakes the braces, we're out, she said. Her ankle brace had replaced her limp with an efficient machine's gait. I don't want the house deciding to balance us into the crawl space. Lightning stitched the ridge. The lights blinked, held, blinked again, and died. The saloon receded a century in a heartbeat. The piano's wires hummed as if the blackout had plucked them. Generator? June asked. Rivas grimaced. Substation's a mess in weather like this. I can pull one from the station after the front passes. A pickup skidded to a stop out front. The door banged open with the confidence of a man who did not mind the law when it slowed him. Silas walked in wet from the shoulders down, 3 people behind him, 2 tourists with windburn, and a woman clutching a damp A map in both hands. Roads blocked, he said, like it was a greeting. Tree down across 37 by Miller's Bend. I got these folks off the shoulder. Every place on Main's full and dark. He lifted a small generator from his shoulder with a grunt and an almost innocent smile. I thought the Mercy might like a heartbeat. We're closed, Rivas said. He took in the tourists, a bearded man in a national parks cap putting on brave, a woman already regretting everything, but refusing to say so, and a third 22 at most holding his phone like a debunker's scalpel. The wind shoved rain against the windows. Hail began salt thrown against tin. We're not sending people back into that, June said. Practical winning over purity. She nodded to a corner. Stay on the mats. Away from the taped square. Nobody moves unless one of us points. Silas set the generator behind the bar, pulled the cord, and coaxed it alive with the intimacy of someone who liked when machines obeyed. Lights returned in a boxy, honest way. The saloon's public ledger gleamed in the new yellow, like a proclamation nailed to a door in a century that loved edicts. Look at that, the young man said. Phone up. Real names. Real spooky. He framed his shot to catch the gavel, and the word reconciliation Rivas had written in tidy black pen at the bottom. Turn that off, Rivas said, gentled by law and weather both. No live streams in a room with open evidence. The kid obeyed with a shrug, tuned to an audience he didn't have. The storm made another point with another bolt. The piano answered with a chord you felt in your ribcage. The generator coughed, flickered, then steadied. The velvet bag on the bar shifted an inch, as if the table had tipped and then hadn't. The lockbox from below sat open near it, 7 paired coins plus chits aligned like proof. The 8th compartment's empty oval looked like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. Mara felt the room arrange itself chairs, aligning to a pattern older than this moment, air drafting from the hidden hall, a mirror taking on the sheen of a lake at dusk. She had the sense of a play ready to begin, when the audience has already bought its programs and silence is turned into expectation. That is the door, she said aloud, not as a charm, but as an acceptance of terms. The piano gave 1A, so pure it made the hairs on her arms lift. She turned to the mirror and the taped public ledger. Below Hargreaves, Dalla Cruz, Anderson, Isaiah Bell, Lee Wen, recorded as W. Lee, Emma Rourke, Kohler. She had left a row of blank lines under reparation due. The original ledger, still locked most of her life, sat to the right, its clasp a small mouth. The clasp sprang with a noise like a good lock making a bad decision. The leather sighed. Pages that had kept their teeth turned themselves, slow and certain, to a section of erased names. Every blank carried the faint pressure ghost of letters they had raised this morning with graphite. Okay, June said, very softly. That's an invitation. Or a requirement, Rivas said. Mara picked up one of the numbered coins from the lockbox and laid it in the hollow of her left hand. She pricked the pad of her right ring finger with a sterilized needle from the first aid kit, her blood bright, not theatrical. She touched the erased groove under Hargreaves and spoke his name clearly. Her finger left a thin red line where ink had been scraped away a century and a half ago. The piano struck one measured note. The gavel tapped once against the bar without moving. The mirror clouded a thumb's breadth and cleared again. The tourists froze the way people freeze when ritual proves itself as procedure. Name them, June said, voice steady. Count out loud, Mara did. Dial A. Cruz, Anderson, Isaiah Bell, Lee Win, O'Rourke. Caller. With each, she let the coin kiss the page and left the thin line of blood across the erased groove. 7 names spoken into the ledger until the house could no longer pretend it had forgotten. The piano answered each with a single hammer. The gavel gave 7 taps. On the 7th, the key beside middle C pressed down and stayed, would and felt choosing to hold. June's hand came down beside Mara's on the bar, flat. Her eyes went wide and then still. When she spoke, it wasn't in her own cadence. The words landed in measured beats, 19th century clerk cold and precise. Entered into the ledger this night. Restoration of the 7. Witnessed by clerk. Her left hand, her offhand, took up a pen and wrote her own initials with a formality that wasn't hers. She lifted the pen, placed it in the inkwell that wasn't there, and left the pen standing in nothing. Mara didn't touch her. The room had found its conduit, and hurting the wire wouldn't help the current. From the door, the young man the debunker laughed once, sharp with nerves. "This is so staged," he said, just loud enough. He stepped closer for a better angle, and the back bar mirror burst not all of it, just a neat square over the ledger, and the clerk's phantom pen glass shingling toward him in a controlled sheet. One shard kissed his throat and drew a line that should have been a nick and became a cut when he yelped and flinched. He clapped a hand to it and came away red. Hold. Pressure. June's voice snapped back to herself as she pressed a clean bar towel against his neck and put his hand on it. "It's shallow. You're okay. Don't talk." The woman with the map began to cry quietly, beautifully. The man in the park's cap made his hands useful because there was nowhere to put fear but into work. "Count," Rivas said to Mara, not unkindly, as if the name itself was now a tourniquet. Mara looked at the ledger. The page wanted an 8th line. The blank. The house had a habit. Truth balanced principle. Interest still accrued. The front door banged in the wind, and Silas took the one step too many into the scene. He had taken off his jacket somewhere. His forearms were roped and bare, a blank coin winking in his vest pocket when he moved. Mara saw it as she'd seen it slide there in the sub-basement. "We're done," she said to him. "Get back." "You're close," he said, and it sounded like pride he hadn't earned. His eyes slid to the open ledger, to Mara's blood on the names, to the public ledger taped on the mirror above. "But you'll never keep it from being a show." He reached into his pocket, palmed the blank coin, and let it walk across his knuckles. "You've got 7. You want people to pay to see the 8th. "Don't," Rivas said, already moving. Silas reached for the ledger with the other hand. He didn't grab it. He lifted it with the care of someone who knows value and doesn't to mistake it for delicacy. And then, with a practiced flick, he struck a match on the bar and touched flame to the edge. The leather didn't take. The paper didn't either. Heat traveled across it like a rubbing, bringing up letters in brown the way heat brings up invisible ink. Lola's script rose, thin and decisive. Statement of L. Bright. By compulsion, I entered into the book's names not present, by instruction of J. Crane, foreman, and a Hollis, judge ad hoc. The cut line at the end bloomed, then stopped where the blade had lived. Rivas was on Silas before the match died. He didn't slam him. He removed him from the ledger's reach like a craftsman moving a dangerous tool. The match fell to the bar, hissed in spilled rainwater, went out. Silas didn't fight. He looked at the revealed line with something like awe. "Well, there it is," he said, almost fond. "Family history. We all got ours." Something in the ceiling popped old pipe surrendering to heat or intention, and an upstairs line let go. Black water century-old silt and a fine dust of forgotten days poured across the back bar. A filthy baptism that hit the ledger, soaked the public copy, and drenched Silas where he stood. He gasped, not in pain but in shock, and reached for his eyes, scraping muck away. A single flake of gold winked in the runnel. The gavel tapped once beneath the noise. Mara had the ledger in her hands again before she knew she'd moved. Water had raised the erased grooves. Her blood had made them visible. The page held 7 lines of truth and 1 hungry blank. The storm hit its stride. The generator faltered, surged, steadied, its little engine protesting and obeying. The tourists pressed into their corner, wound tight and breathing the way you do when your body insists on surviving. The kid's bleeding had slowed to a seep. June kept his hand steady and her words low. Abel Hollis. The room seemed to shape against Mara's ear without words. No, she said, not to defy the house but to clarify terms. He is named. He is not our payment. The gavel tapped twice. A bargain. Then what? June asked, eyes on Mara, hand still on the towel, voice threaded with steel. We have to name what the house thinks payment is, or it will pick at random. Witness, Mara said. We restore names and we publish. We take the ledger out of a room that lets men like Jay Crane control it, and we put it where anyone can read it. We count in public. We pay with truth. The piano gave a low chord, not quite approval, and not quite refusal. The blank coin in Silas's palm twitched, as if a fish had recognized a hand. He closed his fist on it out of habit. His thumb went white with pressure. Rivas tightened his grip on Silas's arm. Not cuffs yet, just a claim. Put the coin down, he said. Silas smiled a little, then a little less when he realized smiling didn't work here. Come on, Mateo, he said. You going to arrest me for rescuing a ledger from a flood? I'm going to arrest you for tampering with evidence, Rivas said, mild as rain. And for trespass. And for being too proud of a fire your people lit 160 years ago. He slid a glance to Mara. Finish your count. Mara looked at the 8th line. The room wanted an entry from a Hollis. That is the door. Interest demands something now. She put her finger to the blank and wrote custodian. Under it, with the blood that would not stop being hers, she wrote Mara Hollis, not as payer, but as the one who would keep the accounts. I will hold the ledger open, she said, so the room could hear the contract. Names are restored. Reparations public begin tomorrow. The house won't have to do violence to make us settle. The gavel tapped 7 times, slow as an old man counting out the last coins in his palm. The piano answered with a chord that felt like tension relieved by a hair. The key that had been held down rose. Glass in the back bar that hadn't broken shivered. A light over the mirror burst, a string of little suns going dark in quick succession. A single chandelier crystal fell and struck Silas's wrist where he held the coin. The cut bloodied him and made him drop it. The blank circled on the bar and came to rest touching the ledger's 8th line. The kid in the corner made a small noise that wasn't fear anymore. It was belief trying not to be. The woman with the map reached for his hand and kept it. The storm took a breath. The generator coughed, died, and left them in the wet dark, with only the piano's wire and the gavel's imagination to anchor things. Lightning reached across the window, like a hand that didn't intend to touch the glass, but did. In that wash of light, 7 figures sat at the bar, not men precisely, but the idea of men where illuminated dust hung in the shapes of shoulders and hats. Their faces were not faces. Their backs were to no one. They looked at the ledger because counting had become the only acceptable conversation. Mara spoke one more time, so the room wouldn't pretend it hadn't heard. Names are restored, reparations begin, the ledger stays open. The figures stayed until the long after-image of lightning turned to nothing, and night resumed its usual work. Then they thinned and went, not upstairs, not below, but out like men leaving a bar, paid. Rain soft, hail stopped. The generator did not return to life, and no one asked it to. The silence that came next was not empty. It was relief with an asterisk. Rivas put his cuffs on Silas, The way you help a man put on a coat he's avoided for years. You can argue with me tomorrow, he said. Tonight you get to sit with a story that won't let you trim it. Silas nodded once, the way a man nods when a wind he can't sell to anyone else goes through him. June checked the kid's neck, peeled the towel back, and smiled a "this will scar well" smile. He's fine, she said to no one and everyone. He'll get to tell a story he can't film. Mara closed the ledger, not to hide it, but to protect it, and set it on a block of dry wood like a priest setting bread somewhere ants can't find it. The blank coin lay touching it, consent or claim. Tomorrow we take this to the county scanner and we put it online, she said, hearing the future snap into procedure. We name the 7. We publish Lola's statement, and we start calling descendants. Money doesn't clean blood, but it can start to balance the page. The gavel did not object. It sat where the room had put it and seemed, for the first time, like a thing that could be used to open rather than to close. Thunder walked away over the ridge. Somewhere in town a transformer finally gave up, and somebody's porch light stuttered out. In the Mercy, the dark settled like ink in a groove. The count had reached 7. The 8th line held a name the house could live with for tonight, custodian. And the house, patient as interest, accepted the terms with the understanding that accounts never close only move forward. Morning washed the Mercy clean in a way rain never could. The storm smelled creosote, and crushed sage moved through the open windows. The low note in the floorboards lightened into something like a breath taken and released. The piano sat with the patience of furniture, its strings carrying only the memory of last night's chords. On the back bar mirror, the public ledger was still taped in place, puckered where black water had run and dried. The thin red lines where Mara had restored the 7 names looked like the work of a careful hand and a long decision. Rivas came early. He'd traded the storm jacket for a shirt-sleeve neatness that read as apology and resolve. Behind him, the kid with the cut on his neck bandage now, sheepish signed a witness statement with June's pen. The woman with the map pressed Mara's fingers once the way strangers do when they need to touch someone who saw the same night. Silas sat on the front step in handcuffs and dignity, a deputy at his shoulder. He stared at the street as if willing a parade to appear. When Rivas read him his rights, he listened like a man who understood the words mattered even if he didn't respect them. What are the charges? Mara asked, because the living world had its rules too. Evidence tampering, trespass, reckless endangerment, Rivas said. We'll add obstruction if I can make it stick. He hesitated a beat. I don't have a charge that makes your father less dead. Not yet. Silas turned his head just enough to find Mara. Public's going to love this, he said. Saint Mara of the Ledger. Pay up and get your absolution. You'll get your day, Rivas said, and guided him to the cruiser with the kind of care you use for a thing that breaks and cuts you both. Inside, Mara and June moved carefully through Aftermath. They blotted the ledger's edges with clean cloth and air-dried the soaked public copy, replacing the worst ruined sheets. June swept glass into a dustpan with slow, precise strokes. Each clean patch of wood was a small square of comfort. They ate unremarkable breakfast sandwiches, standing at the bar because their bodies would punish them later if they didn't. Afterwards, they packed the original ledger, the daybook, the lockbox with its rings, chits coins, and the bright cylinders into padded crates. Rivas signed across each seal in a way that would make a clerk down the line nod. County scanner, he said, then the archive, then public. Now, Mara said. She could feel the house watching, not hostile, but invested. Custodian had not been a metaphor last night. It had been an appointment. The scan. Why now? Why this way? They drove to the county building, the kind of concrete box that performs permanence for towns that change too slowly and too fast. The archivist, a woman whose face you'd trust with your grandmother's letters keyed, them into the records room that still carried the storm's damp as a faint coolness. Rivas did the introductions, and then stepped back law present, but truth-making belonged to the room and to the hands. High-resolution flatbed for the daybook and chits. Overhead camera for the ledger to avoid flattening the binding. June positioned the board. Feathered light. Mara kept a catalog sheet that would make later lawsuits ashamed of themselves. They began with the erased pages, where the thin bloodlines anchored Hargreaves and the others. The image on the monitor bloomed into clarity, scraped fibers to faint pressure ghosts of letters they'd raised with graphite, the red filling the grooves, not gore, not performance, but a deliberate stain that would read on paper as both act and artifact. Under heat from the lights, a further line of Lola's script ghosted up where last night Esmatch had kissed. By compulsion? The statement naming J. Crane and A. Hollis, it was all there in the pixels, patient and damning. Next, the archivist murmured, in the tone of a person who believes in the holiness of sequence. They scanned the rings and shits brass, tin, horsehair with scale markers. June photographed the porcelain flecked fused to the coin's edge, the occlusal cusp that said mouth. Rivas watched and wrote, coins likely dental gold. He underlined likely because the living world needs adverbs to keep it honest. The bright cylinders they recorded last. June set the horn. The archivist nodded to the little USB recorder that looked too plain to be important. Lola's voice came through cleaner than it had in the saloon, storm gone from the room. They listened all the way to the last brutal cut, then let the hiss run a few seconds more. On the spectrogram, a faint line lived below human hearing near the end. June isolated it, boosted gently. Static, and then a breath that might have been room noise and might have been a woman crossing a distance. A whisper like a mouth close to the horn. Count in daylight. The archivist smiled at the screen with professional bite and private awe. We will, she said, and named the file clean. Bright _ Lola _ statement _ 1864.wa. Publication and protection. They uploaded under Rivas's supervision to the county's open portal. Metadata clean and simple. Names of the 7. Statement of Lola Bright. Evidence of confiscation. Mara made a mirror on a non-profit out-of-town server June trusted from a civic records project. She watched the progress bar crawl and thought not prayer, not quite stay with it until it's out of our hands. When the PDF of the ledger pages loaded, it opened to the last scan, the 8th line under the 7 names, the one she had filled last night. Custodian Mara Hollis. A small cursor flickered to life below it, where there had been no field in their file an instant before. The cursor slid one space to the right. Then it tapped return, creating a blank line labeled softly by the site's form, as if the template had just discovered a new schema, new entry. Did you? June began. No, Mara said, steady because someone had to be. The archivist's eyes wired at the corners, but for a very sensible reason, the way light blinks off screens. Rivas exhaled through his nose. It's a website, he said, because you always offer the rational observation first. But it's also this. Mara typed, not a name but a promise. Reparations dispersed public ledger to follow. She hit save. The cursor calmed. On the ride back, the storm's bite had gone out of the air. Power crews had dragged the downed tree off 37. They passed Crane's Tours with its chalkboard, sign wiped by rain to a gray smear. People in town watched their truck go by and did the math you do when you see a car full of people carrying a story. The door that isn't. At the Mercy, the deputy on the porch lifted the tape for them like a doorman who had learned the building's pronouns. Inside, the floor over the tape square looked different. Not repaired simpler. The scenes they'd cut yesterday were gone. Grain ran unbroken where it had split and jumped. June knelt and pressed her ear. The sound that came back wasn't the hollow of a double deck. It was the honest thunk of a single floor. House closed the courtroom, June said, not as magic, just as a measurement of change. We have the box and the records. It doesn't need the chamber anymore. Or it doesn't want copycats, Rivas said. Rooms can have ethics after a fashion. They checked the service hall. The blacked porthole looked back, patient and blind. The panels still swung, but the air beyond it had lost its freeze. The space was just wood again, not mechanism. On the mirror, under the public ledger, the faint etch of "Not Below" had softened to a foggier human streak, and the scratched scale looked less like a threat than a notation. A tiny new scratch had joined them. A neat word cut in a hand. Mara recognized now that she'd seen signatures bloom in heat appeals, and beneath it, nothing but the blind shine of glass. Bureaucracy, June said, and huffed a laugh that had affection for the absurd. The house grew a paperwork department. The first payments and their point. They kept going, because custodian is a verb. June printed the list of names in a plain font and tacked it beside the register. Rivas called a meeting at the community hall for the next evening. Mara wrote letters the way her father had taught her, measured, spelling-checked, made for daylight. She addressed them to descendants they could identify from the chits and the teller as daybook entries. Bell, Dalla Cruz, Anderson, O'Rourke, Lee, Kohler, Hargreaves. She wrote, "We found what was taken. We are putting it on paper and in public. We owe you." June opened a new account at the credit union called the Bright Fund. She seeded it with her own money first, because engineers hate bad math, and Mara added what she had, and Rivas quietly, without badge handed over an envelope, he said was from anonymous donors who weren't anonymous yesterday. Online, donations began to tick in modest tens and the occasional extravagant 100. People like to put their names next to balance when someone else does the column headings. If you listened hard, the piano gave one note each time Mara clicked confirm on a disbursement or scanned another page for upload. It wasn't creepy. It was accounting. Near twilight, a county crew arrived with plywood and proper braces. They didn't need them anymore, not for holes that had closed themselves, but Rivas had ordered them yesterday, and it's a kind of prayer to follow through. He signed the receipt and wrote VOID repair unnecessary in square letters. Silas's lawyer phoned to ask what, precisely, he was supposed to tell his client to expect. Rivas said, arraignment tomorrow, and hung up because the law has schedules even when the past would rather they didn't. June's ankle had gone from pain to a basal throb. She took off the brace and let the skin breathe. Mara made tea on the blue propane flame and set a mug by the gavel as if politeness kept you safe. The building settled. A swallow threaded the open door and then found its way out again. Good omen, if you like birds. The air was almost cool. The sting, because accounts don't close. Mara sat with the ledger open to the last page they had scanned. The 8th line read Custodian Mara Hollis in her hand, and beneath it the blank created online. She let her finger ride the margin and thought about Abel, about Lola, about her father's balance, and about interest, which is the measure of time as a fee. A coin rolled across the bar. No trick of level uphill a fraction from where the velvet bag lay, not from the lockbox, but from nowhere a human hand could claim. It traveled with a stubborn, quiet certainty and stopped against the right boot of Mara Hollis. When she leaned and picked it up, it was blank. The metal was warm in a way that didn't belong to light. Around the rim, the faintest cast marks had not been filed smooth. She set it on the ledger's margin, beside the blank line, and watched. The paper didn't move. The line didn't darken. Not yet. Interest, June said from the doorway. Not morbid, just accurate. Rooms like this keep ledgers the way banks do. You paid principal. They'll check the account tomorrow. And the day after. And next year. Good, Mara said. She surprised herself by meaning it. Someone should. Rivas came back in from the porch with the day's last news. Silas is booked, he said. He made a statement because he can't help himself. He tried to sell me the idea that burning the ledger was performance to help you raise money. His mouth made a small shape that was almost a smile and almost a bruise. Jury will hate him for that. What about the deed? Mara asked. The codicil, the reconciliation. I spoke to the judge, Riva said. Codicils like that don't survive untested. But he's willing to treat the clause as instruction rather than curse. If you reconcile on paper and in public and endow the building as a memorial, the court will recognize title in the Bright Funds Trust. He touched the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing to the memory of Lola. Even if the Crane estate objects. Mara nodded. The house made its noises. A plank ticked. A bottle breathed. The mirror held the appeals scratch like a joke at the expense of time. Outside, Main Street let one car pass. It sounded like a small town trying out a new tone. Night came without tricks. They left one light on, habit by now, and left the service hall panel open, because there are some doors you keep honest by not closing them all the way. The ledger slept under clean cotton, with a gavel on top of the cloth like a paperweight that also remembered how to speak. Mara lay on the cot in the front room because she liked the idea of the town seeing her through the window custodian as visible noun. June took the upstairs at last, satisfied the floor would not decide to edit her in the night. Rivas went home to a house that would ask him fewer questions, but texted call me anyway, so the day would end with a line. Sometime near 2, the piano lifted one key and set it down again without sound, the finger memory of a lullaby deciding it didn't need to be sung. On the bar, the blank coin had not moved. On the ledger, the blank line was still blank, but pressed slightly deeper into the paper, as if a heavy pen had rested there, the way a hand rests on a page before it commits. The house had accepted the terms. It had not forgiven time. It would count again tomorrow. That was fine. That was work. In the morning, Mara would type the first disbursements into the public ledger, call a woman named Belle in Fresno, and offer money that could not change a grave but could, maybe, pay a semester or a surgery. She would sit behind the bar and answer questions and refuse interviews that wanted more ghosts and fewer facts. She would sleep sometimes and wake sometimes with the scale tender on her wrist, a bruise that faded and returned like a habit. For now, the mercy was quiet in a way that owed something to balance and more to intention. The accounts were open. The custodianship had a name. And somewhere under the floor that was no longer double, the shape of a room made of decisions agreed to remain a shape and not a mouth. A faint sound traveled through the wood one tap, then nothing, not a threat. A reminder